Before we get started, we'll do brief intros. We'll go right to left. I lead Lumina. We're an AI native digital wealth manager focused on owners and creators.
Duane Block with A&M Crypto. We advise financial services firms, crypto natives, the public sector on all things digital asset adoption.
Rob Schmults, I'm a general partner with Blockchange Ventures. We're an early stage venture capital firm, which I guess as the name makes clear, focused on the blockchain.
I'm Charlie Sandor. I'm an investment partner at CMT Digital. We're also an early stage venture fund based here in Chicago.
So let's start with the applications, like winners and losers. Who stands to gain the most? There's the enterprise, there's the consumer, their apps. Where do we feel that's going to be most value creation that's tangible in the next 1 to 3 years? Anyone?
I would say the infrastructure stands to win. As stablecoins become invisible and so much infrastructure gets created, those that provide that and allow for the integration that makes the use cases real have tremendous upside.
So like who specifically are you looking at there? Like Circle or picks and shovel stablecoin operators, private companies, public companies, or?
Of any size that can do the seamless on and off ramp, the custody, the integration into the systems that are already being used, effectively making the payment rail invisible, but the value tangible.
And maybe I'll pick up the second half of your question on the losers. Building on Duane's point, I think as you start to get those kind of efficiencies and blockchain kind of going under the hood, anyone who's sort of historically had rent-seeking opportunities, been able to exploit inefficiencies, that's where you start to see, I think, pretty serious losers because they just get cut out of the system.
And who would you name? Is there like a category of players specifically? Like what about like the card issuers that they have the 3% swipe, it's a big driver of bank earnings, they also have distribution. Are they on the winner side of this or the loser side of this equation?
Again, I think if you're value adding, so classically a rent seeking is someone who doesn't add value, they just collect a toll. If you're value adding, then I think you can probably still be okay, although you will be under pressure no matter what. I think one thing we saw with the internet is it wasn't just the companies that got sort of efficiencies from the internet that had to provide sort of the best-in-class service. It was everybody else too, and so you either had to be at parity or lose.
So who's most at risk? Would you say?
So let me give you an example. And this isn't a pitch, but I'll use a portfolio company as an example. So we invested in a company called Blocksky. Very briefly, the original intent there is to remove the global distribution system, which is the underlying rails for travel. What they discovered, and this is focused on business travel, what they discovered along the way is by connecting United directly to PwC for the booking experience and the managing of travel, they said, hey, wait a second, right now corporate travel settles on credit card rails, that's crazy, and why should these guys be paying interchange fees for that volume? You can imagine how much PwC spends.
So enterprise merchant spend would be, that's currently on a card, for example.
Right, yeah. And so the card gets cut out, and now it settles direct between PwC and United, PwC and American, et cetera, which if you think about it, only when you look at it with fresh eyes do you think, wait, the way corporate travel spending works makes 0 sense, right? Using personally liable credit cards. And so they're able to use stable coins as a way to settle direct between a very large buyer of services and a very large supplier of services. Does that answer your question?
Yes. Yep. Charlie?
Yeah, I think if you look at it, just breaking down from enterprise to consumer, on the enterprise level, I'd say the losers are correspondent banks, right? Because with stable coins, if you look at it today, like a company like OpenFX, right? I think they're annualizing $90 billion in settlement cross-border.
What does OpenFX do?
OpenFX basically just does enterprise cross-border transfers of money. So if you're a multinational company with a London office and a Chicago office, or US-based, London-based, and you want to send $5 million, they'll do it. They'll charge less than 10 basis points for your transaction, and it'll settle within 15 minutes. And so that eliminates the need to use correspondent bankings, right, and have to deal with all the international transfers.
All stablecoin enabled?
It's all stablecoin
That's
enabled.
A real winner. We're seeing that right now then.
And they launched, I think, 18 months ago, right? And then also, I think you see the emergence of like the next generation of banks, right? With a bank like Erebor, right? Where your bank deposit is both a fiat account as well as a wallet. And so in a sense, like if you have stable coins and you're international, you can just send it directly to someone at Erebor. And once they receive those stable coins, they register it as a true deposit. I think the card issuers actually aren't losers here. I think one thing where stablecoins don't really disrupt is credit. Because if you think about what Visa and MasterCard, obviously on the debit side, I think that's disrupted a little bit, but today you still need merchant acceptance, right? So if you look at like the most successful card, like crypto native card company, it's Rain, but they're issued on Visa because they need all the merchant acceptance. And so I think on debit, you'll see that disrupted a bit, but on credit, no, because stablecoins are instant settlement. So in any day, someone has to front that credit for a credit card, right? Because it's generally on a 30-day payment timeline. So I think that's much more long tail, and I don't think you'll see that disrupted in the near term. But on the flip side, a big benefactor is someone like Stripe, where if anything, they flip from like a credit transaction where they pay out most of the fees they take in interchange to stablecoins. I think they charge like 2% flat fee right after the acquisition with Bridge. They capture almost all of that margin, and so that increases their margin profile pretty massively.
Fair enough. Is there any opportunity for relief for the merchants, right? There are a lot of thinly capitalized merchants. They have a 1% net profit margin. That could be the corner deli. It could be a retailer like Kohl's. They're paying points of their margin in interchange. Can they expect any relief? So if the card issuers don't lose ground, is the implication that those merchants aren't going to see relief?
What's interesting there is they clearly have an economic value proposition if you take out that interchange, that at the same time,
100%.
there needs to be usage. So what drives that usage, what drives that adoption? Because the economics currently don't favor the retail user using stablecoins for everyday purchases. Not only would you not have the reward in many cases, but also, as he mentioned, it's pre-funded, so you're not also getting the float of paying your bill at the end of the month.
Makes sense.
Yeah, and I think over time you'll see a consumer shift, right? If you go to like South America or Asia, almost everyone pays via e-wallet. They don't use credit cards, right? They pay directly from their bank using real-time payment networks. Like we have a company down in Argentina that basically what they'll do is the middleware. So they let anyone from Argentina use the real-time payment networks in Brazil and Colombia, and they use stable coins to bridge that. And I think in that scenario, right, merchants are the winner because it removes the 3%, 3.5% interchange on a credit card. And then I think if you look at what Stripe's doing with the acquisition of Privy, they're going to build out basically like merchant accounts where all of a sudden you get paid $100 and then you're instantly earning 4% yield on that because it's a stablecoin backed by treasuries, right? And then you never have to bridge it off to a bank account. You can just keep it and earn active yield there. You can do integrations with DeFi and earn 6% if you're on Morpho. And then you need to go pay your expenses and you just pay via stablecoin, right?
What was the name of the startup that you mentioned in Argentina?
Oh, in Argentina, it's called DPay. And they don't touch consumers at all, but what they do is they work with big banks in Argentina and they set up accounts across all the real-time payment networks. And so when you do it, they just do the bridging. So you scan and you'll pay from your Argentinian bank account and they handle the FX and then you settle in the local currency in Brazil or in Colombia or Peru.
And I think what Charlie's pointing out, but you tell me if I'm misinterpreting, is to break like the network effects of a card network, you need to have sufficient utility to break whatever the strength of the network effect is. And so the card network effect in Argentina is lower than, say, here in the US. So that's not to say that the US card network effect is not breakable, but the utility is going to have to be that much stronger to get the merchants, the consumers, all the participants to shift over.
Does Visa, MasterCard, Amex have any risk? Now, those the card issuers, which would be banks like JP Morgan, Citibank that issue co-brand airline cards. They're the ones charging most of the VIG when the merchant pays and has a swipe. Then you have the networks, of course, like the Visas and MasterCards of the world. Do they have risk here? Are they still relevant in a world where people can authenticate, do security checks with a mobile phone?
So I'm not going to say, point at the left field wall and say they're doomed or they may be fine, right? But I think the use cases that the four of us can come up with right now, while interesting, are not going to be the really big breakout use cases, right? So I think it might have been Paul in his opening remarks talked about the second order effects of a lot of the innovation that we're seeing now. And in the same way in the internet that you could see e-commerce early on as being something the internet was going to enable, but you didn't necessarily, or very few people I would posit, were able to see things like social media, the gig economy, cloud computing name all the biggest outcomes on the internet, maybe bar Amazon. They weren't predictable in advance. They had to happen, and then we now just treat them all like, oh, well, that was obvious because we use it day in, day out. I suspect we'll see the same sort of breakthrough, net new utility, net new innovation, new categories of business emerge.
That we haven't seen yet.
That we haven't seen yet.
We've seen some with like OpenFX, but it's still early days. Like
But I might say OpenFX, while a great
The
example.
rain card is probably another winner.
But is certainly sounds super innovative, but is also sort of iterative. That's not a bad thing. I'm not dissing them, but I think it'll be the things that we sort of can't predict in advance that are going to be the really big outcomes that things like stablecoin and the blockchain will end up enabling.
And they're also early adopters of recognizing that this is infrastructure and can drive more efficiencies, and that's why you're seeing major networks use stablecoins for settlement at the enterprise level.
Fair enough. So JP Morgan also has JP Morgan Coin. Citibank has a large international payment system. I mean, these are the big banks that presumably technology will be poised to disrupt. Is that a real threat for them, or do they just have lock-in due to their enterprise connectivity and their licensing across borders and their KYC AML infrastructure? What does this mean for them?
So you're way more qualified to answer than I am, but I'll go first anyway. I think what we've seen, whenever we've seen open technologies emerge, the large incumbents tend to use them to create walled gardens, and the walled gardens ultimately lose. Maybe there'll be an exception, right? I mean, hard to bet against someone like JP Morgan, but I think walled gardens we've seen over and over again ultimately fall because the market and market participants are drawn to the value creation and the utility of more open systems.
And I think that's playing out before our eyes, right? We see the large banks that all have their own chains for on-us use cases that benefits corporate clients paying each other. It can be used for asset issuance, but the question then is liquidity and interoperability and connecting the asset with the cash leg. So as we then think about compliance and why we had a separate chain in the first place, how can we do that on a public chain? Well, that's being solved too at the smart contract layer with identity and other things that preserve compliance.
Yeah, I hope you're right on the open garden model. If you look at social media, they do have closed gardens and they're successfully capturing their customers. JP Morgan shut down Plaid access to these various accounts. It seems like the incumbent who has control of the customer has a lot of influence how this plays out. We really haven't seen much disruption in public markets except for names like Fiserv and FIS who power the community banks. Now, they also have the stablecoin as a service solution that they're building. Anyone want to comment on what they're doing, and do you think that community banks and regional banks can lean into this and benefit, or are they at high risk of disruption?
Well, there's potentially 3 tiers there because you have the very, very small, which benefit from the connectivity to an FIS, a Fiserv, a Jack Henry, another player that is orchestrating. You have the middle tier, which they're coming together in consortia of their own, that they're building the capabilities. And then you have the very largest, some of the examples we gave, where they're even using the on-us use cases just in their own backyard. So if you think about those 3 tiers, I think they're each responding logically but differently.
Fair enough.
Yeah, and the only thing I'll say, if you look at like the big banks like JP Morgan, Goldman, Morgan Stanley, and so forth, I think regardless of the disruption, it's not going to hit their bottom line too much because at this point, like their trading profits for the last 2 years, right, have been skyrocketing. They've done pretty well with M&A advisory. They will continue to do well on that with all the IPOs in the pipeline. So even if they are disrupted to some extent, I don't think it's really going to hit their financials. And then if you go on the other side with regional community banks, I think it's a huge opportunity for them, right? Because as they win more business from being kind of more forward-thinking, their margins are already so small where there's a huge opportunity. And we've already seen that from companies we work with, leveraging different community banks that have doubled their business in less than a year by being open to working with like crypto companies and accepting stablecoin deposits.
Well, and also the point you made earlier, if the correspondent banking network gets undermined, that's probably, depending on what replaces it, that's probably very good for smaller banks, community banks who are kind of at the mercy of the correspondent banking network.
Is there any overlap between AI and stablecoins? Paul talked earlier about how stablecoins provide primitives like ownership and trust. when do we see an intelligence layer emerge? Are there startups focused on this? Do they have any traction?
Well, absolutely. And just to touch on the value, the agentic payment space is the obvious example because an agent isn't going to use a fiat dollar. They're going to use something that can be controlled with a private key, like a stablecoin on a blockchain. So the use case is there. I think now the question would be the governance layer to drive the adoption of that.
Yeah, and I like how Duane set that up because I think, again, where we often see some of the most interesting outcomes are combinatorial innovation, right? It's peanut butter plus chocolate equals,
Right.
And so AI plus blockchain is potentially a really interesting intersection of combinatorial innovation. But I'd also add that certainly we're seeing in our portfolio is even companies that were never, we're crypto plus AI, they're using AI to get value. And so I think even if we don't see explicit, well, I think we will, but let's say we didn't see explicit intersections, there's no doubt that enterprises using stablecoins will combine it in some way to leverage AI. I mean, I think that's kind of a foregone conclusion.
Mm-hmm. Charles, are you seeing startups focused on this?
Yeah, and I think it's kind of like the obvious path, right? Like my corporate credit card's used for most of our team's AI spend, and it's like a $10 top up here, $10 top up here on like different platforms, right? And then I get the expenses, and I have 60 different expenses for $15 each. It's like, okay, why don't I throw $1,000 into a wallet? And I think you'll see this anyways, because all AI platforms at this point, right, you used to do $20 and it was X amount of subscription. They've all gone to credit based, and it's all token usage, right? And so it's pay as you go, more or less. And doing that for $1, $2 doesn't make sense with any type of credit card or existing payment rails. But with stable coins, it makes a ton of sense, right? And that way, any AI agent or AI platform can go out and just pay per usage and be interoperable across all the different use cases, which I think you've actually seen AI startups being very open to, right? Everyone has an MCP. Everyone's kind of building their software products to be accessible by agents. It's not just building for a human user. It's also how do we make this accessible to agents? And I think you're just going to see that increase over time.
So it seems like overall we're still very early. We're talking about picks and shovels layer, we're talking about opportunities that could potentially break through. We have a couple of proof points here and there, but it's not broad-based. We have more ideas than realized value creation at this point. Is that a fair?
Yeah, but I think
or?
what ChatGPT launched publicly less than 3 years ago. I think people lose sight of how fast this space has grown and accelerated, and it's only going to continue like that. And if you look at even just like blockchain, right, we're 13 years in plus, well, I guess less for smart contracts, but yeah, I think 10 years on smart contracts and less than 3 years on a public version of ChatGPT. So I think you're just going to see it compound and accelerate.
And maybe a few statistics to that question. 310 billion of stablecoin market cap. However, 83% of that is in two stablecoins. 99% is dollar denominated. 33 trillion in 2025 transaction volume, but only 390 billion of that was actually payments, 1.2%. And if we also think about on the B2B side, only 1% of treasurers have currently adopted. So still early, lots of opportunity.
Seems like there's got to be a pain point that's going to motivate the adoption. Like, I know there was a lot of attention around machine-to-machine payments maybe a year or two ago. You can enable a payment with an API key. It doesn't necessarily need a stable coin. Claude can interact with my browser, execute a purchase on Amazon. Might not be the cleanest experience, but there's ways to get transactions done today. So are there other pain points that you're seeing that might motivate some behavior shift and adoption?
And it sounded like you were giving consumer examples.
Those are
right?
consumer examples,
Yeah,
yes.
I think, and this probably isn't going to be too controversial with this crowd, the bigger opportunity is B2B. So like right now, like a card tap or Zelle or Venmo or you name it, right? If I happen to know any of you money in this room, we can very quickly figure it out and with multiple options. And saving a little bit on what's often a free transaction, right? It's not material. But I think for businesses, and this is why I think this panel and others have talked about under the hood, that's where the real savings are, because even though on a percentage basis they may be paying less than consumers do, the volume is so large that it adds up to real dollars if you can just shave off a little bit. So I think what will happen and what is happening, like the example I gave with BlockSky, is, and this may be borne out by your statistics, is there's already a lot of activity going on. We just don't see it because it's B2B, not B2C.
That's fair.
And I would also say, to your point of the unlock, we have the Genius Act, but rulemaking is still in progress. We also have a question on cash equivalency. And once we understand that a stablecoin is a cash equivalent, that takes a lot of ambiguity away for many to drive
So
that
regulatory
adoption.
is still a barrier
Correct.
to growth. Okay.
Yeah, and ultimately, I think when you see consumer adoption, the consumer's not even going to know, right? You go to tap to pay, and it doesn't matter to you how the payment settles. We don't pay the 3% interchange. Well, occasionally you do, but for the most part, you don't pay the interchange fee. It's on the back end. So if you go to tap to pay and Stripe settles in stablecoin, the consumer's none the wiser, and I don't think it really matters if the consumer actively is paying with stablecoins or they're just going to pay for what they want.
Got it. So I think last question. So if you're an investor in the room, what's the best way to position for this opportunity? It sounds like private markets, enterprise payments. That sounds like a venture story. Is that accurate, or are there
I
ways
think
in the
of it
public
as
markets?
make the rail that's enabling the value
Yeah.
invisible.
I get asked all the time, what are you excited about? And I always say, I'll tell you 5 minutes after I see it. So it's just kind of the nature of where I invest.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I think in the current state, it's still pretty early, but it's mainly on the private side.
Got it. Terrific. Well, I think we covered a lot of ground there. Thanks for joining me, and give my panel an applause, please.
Thank you.